I'm just going to come right out and say that the miracle that we all need today isn't to believe in the resurrection of Jesus. The miracle we need is to be able to see anything new in this ancient story, to find any hope for our lives in this story that gets proclaimed as the good news year after year. It's a story that many of us have heard so many times that our brains decide to conserve energy by not paying attention. Nothing new to see here. I really do get it. No judgment from me. My own husband on Tuesday this week, said, "Well, did you finish your sermon yet?" I glared at him across the dinner table as I over-enunciated the two letters in the word no. He chirped back, "Why not? Does the story end differently this year?" Bless his heart. He says the same thing whenever he finds me reading the same book or watching the same movie that I've seen 100 times. But it made me pause as I wondered, why do we return to the same stories over and over and over again? Also on Tuesday, in our weekly writing group, someone mentioned negativity bias, the principle that negative events have a far greater impact on us than positive ones. Quote, "Most of the research shows that bad things have about 2, 3, or 4 times as much impact as good things." So says social psychologist Roy Baumeister, one of the co-authors of the book, The Power of Bad, How Negativity Effect Rules Us and How We Can Rule It. So it seems to me that one of the reasons that we need to tell the good news story of Easter over and over and over again is because we actually need to hear it over again for it to sink in. Good news doesn't just register in the same way as bad news. And it doesn't help that some of us have a tendency to deflect good news so as not to be disappointed or let down later on. But there's another reason for hearing the same story over and over that I find equally compelling. The story might be the same year after year, but we are different. With each telling and each hearing of the annual Easter story, we've experienced another year of growth and setbacks, of celebrations and heartaches. We've had accomplishments and failures. There may be a new person in our life, or one fewer. The world itself has changed and it will never be the same. And so with each telling and each hearing, we bring new perspectives and vantage points. We have more experience to draw from to help us as we consider and reconsider the same story, finding new entry points into it and pathways through it. With all of this in mind, I invite you to consider that there may just be something new for you here. And if this story is new for you, I'd say you're one of the luckiest people in the house this morning. Bearing these things in mind, the principle of the negativity bias and the fact that we're not the same people as we were at Easter time last year, let's consider Luke's telling of the Easter story. Early in the morning on that first day of the week, a group of women go to the tomb where they had seen Jesus being laid. We know from earlier in the story that this tomb belongs to Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the council who did not agree with the others in the plot to kill Jesus. After Jesus died, he got permission to take Jesus' body, wrap it in linen cloths, and lay it in his own new tomb. The women saw this, but it was nightfall on Friday, and according to Jewish custom, the Sabbath begins at dusk on Friday. So they go home and prepare the burial spices right away, because all day Saturday, they are required to rest in order to observe the Sabbath. Rest. Laden with grief It seems both the only thing to do and an impossible thing to do. Prohibited from working to keep themselves occupied, they're forced to sit with their grief and the trauma of Jesus' horrific execution. There was no staying busy preparing food for funeral guests, dusting bookshelves to avoid fidgeting, or pulling weeds to get out of the crowded, noisy house. The women named here, Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and the mother of James, are the very ones mentioned in chapter 8 as having supported Jesus' ministry out of their own resources. They provided for him, tending to him in life, and they will be the ones to care for his body in death as well. As soon as they can on Sunday morning, early at dawn, the text says, they came to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. Mary Magdalene's hair must still have smelled like that jar of spikenard perfume, the one that she poured over Jesus' feet last week and then wiped dry with her hair. As she walked, I wonder if she would have been considering wrapping her hair around her face, creating a mask to filter out the smell of death that they would surely encounter in the tomb. Upon arrival, they were confused and terrified. Jesus' body isn't where they saw it being laid. And then 2 men appear out of nowhere, asking the oddest question about why the women are looking for the living among the dead. They're not. They're looking for the dead body of Jesus in exactly the place where it should have been. I don't know what it would have been more confusing, that Jesus' body is not where it should be, or this truly bizarre question. The women don't even reply. The text says they're perplexed and terrified. Many of us have experienced this kind of psychological shock, the feeling of detachment, like you're floating out of your body, and the kind of confusion where your brain is struggling to process some really bad news. The death of a loved one, an unwelcome diagnosis, the loss of a job, the sudden end of a relationship. The room might literally spin. You may have to steady yourself, grabbing hold of a piece of furniture nearby, your heart pounding in your ears. You might actually fall to the ground. You might cry out, or you might be struck deaf and dumb. I imagine this is something of how the women felt at that moment. How do they move beyond this kind of shock, where they are struck silent, terrified, and on their faces? How do they ground themselves back in this present moment in order to absorb this unimaginable news? They're encouraged to remember, not to believe, not to have faith, to remember. But remember what exactly? On the one hand, they're being encouraged to remember the things Jesus said and did, all those healings, all those miracles, including the raising of Lazarus from the dead not too long ago. They're encouraged to remember his teachings that painted a vision of an abundant life of meaningful connections with God, with each other, with creation, and with themselves. And they do. They do remember, and it grounds them back in this present moment. They come back to themselves. They're able to get up. They make it back to the other apostles, and they tell them what it is that they have seen. The line from that Mary Oliver poem read just a minute ago echoes again here. Instructions for living a life. Pay attention. Be astonished. Tell about it. Most of the men think the women are talking nonsense, which surprises no woman today. But Peter, the one who had denied even knowing Jesus the night Jesus was arrested, who fled in shame, gets up and runs to the tomb, looks in, sees the linen cloths laying there, and goes home amazed. Pay attention. Be astonished. Tell about it. What about us? Dare we allow ourselves to have hope, risking disappointment or despair? Dare we risk being astonished, let alone tell others about it? What do we need to remember? To cultivate hope in our lives, we must allow Jesus' vision of an abundant life of meaningful connections, of joy and beauty to take root in us. This might be easier said than done, but it is possible. If you can imagine what exactly an abundant life looks like for you, if you can pay attention to every detail of that vision, you can decide to take practical steps toward that vision. Maybe it looks like coffee or lunch or walk with a friend or a small group. Maybe it looks like getting involved in some community project. Maybe it's spending more time observing and learning from nature. Maybe it's finally learning to paint or play the piano or some other dream you've had. Maybe it's playing with baby goats or holding chicks in the courtyard outside after the service this morning. Actually holding new life in your hands. I would love to talk with you about it and be a conversation partner as you consider the possibilities. The point is that these practical steps toward a vision of abundant life help you connect with and remember your true self. Our true self is the place where God dwells in each of us, which has nothing to do with how much or how little faith you have. It has zero to do with believing a checklist of theological or church doctrine. Your true self is the part of you that is whole, undamaged, and cannot be compromised. From that place, where we all have the wisdom and compassion that we need, we can move toward this vision of abundant life, grounded in full of hope, overflowing with joy and abundance and beauty. This unbelievable story can then take root in us, can grow in us year after year, with no need to have everything all figured out, buttoned up with certainty. There will be more next year. Cynthia Bourgeault is a writer and teacher of contemplative spirituality with Richard Rohr's Center for Action and Contemplation. She says this about Easter. Easter is the sacrament of a new consciousness, a new awareness of belonging to God, creation, and one another. We need to experience this sacrament, this touchstone every year, because every year we are changed. And every year we need to remember the vision of abundant life that Jesus proclaimed and embodied, so that we can practice living it too, sharing it with others, all filled to the brim. May it be so. Amen.